Now, why do people who don't know the Bible need the gospel? That's where he turns to in verse 12. Aren't they excused? Since they don't really clearly know God exists. They would say, I haven't been convinced. Aren't they excused since they're ignorant? Paul has already laid out in Romans 1 that no one is ignorant in the sense of, oh my goodness, I didn't know. He said, if anyone is ignorant, they are willfully ignorant. They are willfully suppressing the truth that God has clearly revealed to them in creation. By the things that have been made, God is screaming, there is a God and you are accountable to him. So anyone who says, oh, I didn't know, is willfully ignorant. Further than that, you would say, well, what about people who don't really know the Bible, and so they don't know the clear commands of God of right and wrong, and the 10 commandments, or all the laws that clearly communicate that we should do this, but we don't do this? Paul deals with that here. Look at verse 12. Why do people who don't know the Bible need the gospel? For all who have sinned without the law will also perish without the law. Saying, you've never heard about the law of God? You're still going to perish for your sin. No excuse. And all who have sinned under the law, talking about Jews who are religious people who clearly know what God has communicated in his law, will be judged by the law. For it is not the hearers of the law who are righteous before God, but the doers of the law who will be justified. Look at verse 14. For when Gentiles, those who would say, I didn't know the law of God. I didn't know that these right and wrong commands. I didn't really truly realize, oh my goodness, I have sinned because I didn't know the law. For when Gentiles who do not have the law, by nature do what the law requires, they are a law to themselves, even though they do not have the law. What does he mean by that? He's saying everyone instinctively knows that there is right and there is wrong. Everyone knows that. And if anyone denies that there is right or there is wrong and it is clear, is suppressing the truth. The Gentiles who've never read the law show that they know the law through the fact that they do know that there's a right and there's a wrong. They're a law to themselves even. It's as if he's saying by their own standard of judgment, they will be judged. Francis Schaeffer, who was one of the greatest apologists in the 20th century, when it came to this passage, he would say, it's as if God is saying he has put a tape recorder around every single person's neck. And in the judgment, and that final day, God will judge those who say, oh, I didn't know the law. He said, he'll just take the tape recorder off their neck, which recorded every single time a person said, well, that person ought to do this, or we should do that, or you shouldn't do that. And he will just judge them according to their own standards that they've clearly communicated in their mouth or in their mind. And Schaeffer points out that Paul is saying, if that's the only basis by which God judged you, we would all still fail. You don't just have to have the law of God clearly. We will even be judged according to our own standards, and the own standards that you've set for other people, you don't even meet them. Neither do I. He continues and goes even more, showing that even people who don't have the law are without excuse. He says in verse 15, they show that the work of the law is written on their hearts. God has written his law on our hearts. We do know there's right and wrong. And then he gets even further. While their conscience also bears witness, their conscience also testifies. God has given us a conscience, and it is not a perfect rule for how we should do things. That's why we always have to appeal to the word of God. But our conscience that God has given us and the law written on our hearts that we know there's right and wrong is enough to condemn us, because it reveals we know instinctively there are things we should not have done and we did them anyways. Things we should have not said and we said them anyways. Things we should have done, but we didn't do them. Even our conscience bears witness. Though, as he says, our conscience is conflicting. The conflicting thoughts, our conscience is not a perfect rule, but it's a sufficient rule to reveal that we know there's right and wrong, and we have not even tried to live up to it. Their conflicting thoughts accuse them or even try to excuse them. Paul says your conscience can be seared. Friends, we all have the law of God written on our hearts and a conscience that knows there is right and wrong. We are all without excuse.